Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of The Owl's Nest. We are now about a month deep into quarantine. I've lost track of exactly where the time has gone. Everything's just sort of blurring into one long week for me. Jake, how you doing over there on your side?
Not too bad. Can't complain too much. Other people have a lot of worse.
They sure do. So everybody out there, make sure that you're staying safe, staying healthy. Today we're going to take a look at the takeaways from last week. We're also going to forecast a few of the teams based on what we've seen so far in these past 10 weeks. We're coming up on about the middle of the season, so I think that we've seen the majority of what we're going to see out of these teams. We'll talk a little bit about what that might look like in the future. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the more recent hero pool changes and what this week's meta might end up looking like as a result. But to start out with, the Vancouver Titans, last time we saw them was at the beginning of the season. There's been a lot of moving around for them, but they came back this past weekend playing against the Charge and the Chengdu Hunters. And I have to say, Jake, did you expect Vancouver to go 0-2 in the same weekend?
No, I wouldn't have expected this result from the team. I think this was just a bad week for them in terms of strategy. I just felt like, at least in the Hunters game, their Ryan Zarya strat worked on Busan, which is a pretty strong map for that comp in general. You can, rush the enemy down, fight at close range. But then the next three maps, they pretty much just got chopped up into little pieces by the double shield with Hanzo Mei. And it felt like they just never really reacted. And without the D.Va, it really didn't feel like they could deal with that amount of spam coming in. They played a little bit of the comp themselves, but got bested in the mirror, so... props to their opponents, at least.
Yeah, I have to say, I was really disappointed. I know that on last week's show, you had mentioned that for the Vancouver Titans, their strong suit is running more of a dive-oriented comp. But obviously, last year, and it's not exactly the same team, but last year, they were one of the best in the GOATS meta, with Bumper and Tizzy. So I have to ask, do you think that letting go of them and bringing in Fissure, at least for this particular weekend, was kind of one of the things that backfired on them a little bit?
I guess. I don't think that was really the reason, at least in my mind. I think it's like an overall team strategy thing that they're playing these alternate comps. I don't think Dive would have really worked this week. I just think it's wasn't a good pool for Dive. Too difficult to execute. But I think the biggest thing this week was just like they're trying to play this Ryan Zarya into double shield, and as soon as they can't rush through the shields and the maps don't favor them, then they get in these positions where they're on low ground with Ryan Zarya against double shield on high ground. It just felt like strategically they didn't have the answers to that. I felt like they were too reliant on Janu's D.Va normally making plays in those situations, which obviously not available this week. And I felt like that really hurt them.
We also saw, wasn't it the Charge? They brought out a Roadhog for the first time this season, I believe.
Yeah, playing a little Roadhog. I think the hero has a bit of potential, but the number one reason is that D.Va is out of the pool, right? So with D.Va in the pool, it's pretty difficult to get finished kills on the hooks, so it's not going to be that good. But without D.Va, that's like the most important hero to be out of the pool to play Roadhog. Reaper as well, so right, like two of the biggest problems for Roadhog are out of the pool. So uniquely good week for Roadhog, and still, maybe 10% of teams play him. Shows how bad of a state that hero is in.
So do you think next time we see the Vancouver Titans, obviously, you mentioned just sort of a bad weekend with them with hero pool selection. You think that they'll bounce back the same way that the Shock have against both the Valiant and the Gladiators, which we'll talk about in a second here?
Well, I think it could very easily be a bounce back for them. No guarantees, obviously. We'll see how they take the losses in terms of the emotional perspective. But in my mind, the reason they lost was strategy, tactics, not execution or ability on the players level. So, while it doesn't feel good, I think it's the best way to lose. I think if you're losing because you're just getting outclassed, then there's not much you can really do to fix that besides get better, get new players, which are, pretty difficult problems to be having. But when your problem is the strategy and you're not playing the right comps, then, next week you just fix that and get some wins. So nothing to be too worried about, I think, for the Titans fans, but definitely a tough week for them.
Well, let's hope so, because I was, really excited to see Jae-Hung finally get in there to be able to play, and then having an 0-2, on the new team, it's tragic. He's one of my favorite players in the league, and wish nothing but success for him. Speaking of success, Philadelphia Fusion score another 2 wins against both the Atlanta Reign and the Paris Eternal, but just barely. Both of these went to Game 5s. Let's start with the match against the Paris Eternal. What was it that stood out to you in this matchup?
I think it's just Philly's DPS line and their support line working together. Tank's playing well. Honestly, you can't really fault anyone on Philly in terms of being a weak spot. They just look like one of the best teams right now, and I think it's pretty impressive, even though it goes map 5, right? Against Atlanta, against Paris. These are two teams that have also been really, really impressive. Maybe Atlanta getting a bit of a slow start, but it's always been clear, I think, that they'll be a competitor come playoffs. So I think, despite going map 5s, I mean, if anything, that's good practice for Philly, right? Like, they're not going to be in a position where they're getting overconfident stomping people, but at the same time, they're not going to be worried when they go to a 2-2 series, in those playoff moments where you have to clutch up. Feels like that they can certainly do it this year. I mean, I feel like maybe Philly's always been a clutch team, but now not only are they a clutch team, but they're also winning in the neutral game. I think what I've heard them talk about is that in the past, they've kind of stooped down to the level of their opponents. If their opponents are playing less organized style, Philly would kind of stoop to that level and sometimes fall victim to it. But this season, they've looked way more composed, way more focused. And, if a team gives them free wins, they're going to take the free wins. And if they don't, they're going to be able to battle it out. So you got to give props to Philly. They look like certainly one of the best teams right now.
What do you think the biggest difference has been for them since last year, which, definitely seemed be a little bit of an off year for them?
I think it's the support line, right? Like that's where you have to see the biggest change here. And
yeah.
when it comes to exactly what I talked about with, being more stable and when the opponents aren't playing well, you don't stoop to their level. That comes in a lot of ways from your callers, from your main support, and also your flex support. These core backliners who are in many ways dictating the level of aggression that the team, can bring out. Those are the heroes, the players who should be saying, no, slow it down, let's get repositioned. They're there for that purpose, and that's really, they're playing that role really well. You got to give props to Alarm and Funny Astro, two, I think, of the best supports in the league. Not even thinking of them as rookies in the rookie category, but they are, which is pretty impressive, I think, for both those players. I see them as some of the best players in the league, and everyone's going to talk about Philly's DPS and tanks, and they're no slouches to be sure, especially that off-tank role. Pretty disgusting to have Poco and Fury. But for me, Funny Astro and Alarm are like the real game changers here.
Yeah, moving into their match against the Atlanta Reign, if I remember correctly, didn't Funny Astro and Alarm, at least for a few of those matches, accounted for half of the killing blows for Philadelphia?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really rate killing blows too highly because it's not really significant. You could deal just like a random chance thing. Like if everyone's focusing the same target, the person who gets the final blow is basically random. So I don't really give him too much credit for that. Particularly, I think it's just like staying alive, having long team fights, getting a lot of value.
Well, speaking of final blows, though, of course, Carpe setting league record for being the first one lifetime 4,000 killing blows, and I believe either the week before, maybe it was last week as well, also 400 or 500 solo kills as well. I know they were throwing around on the desk whether or not Carpe should be up for the greatest of all time. Real quick, thoughts on that?
No doubt. I mean, if it's going to be anybody, it might as well be Carpe, right?
All right, and then finally from this weekend, the Shock completed their revenge tour against the Los Angeles Gladiators. 3-0, clean sweep. So what do you think that though? I mean, obviously, everyone has bad weekends, any given payload, as I like to say. What was it you think that they were able to correct? Do you think it was something as simple as maybe the wrong hero pool for the weekends that they took the losses, or maybe just not on their game?
I mean, I think this is just really well played by the Shock. Maybe, a little bit more dominant than it could have been. I do agree, LA Gladiators maybe off their game a little bit relative to how strong they've looked in the past. But Shock just showing that they're still a fearsome team. No matter what happens to this team, wins, losses, I'm always going to be putting money on them come playoff time. I'm not actually. That would probably be immoral. But, if I was a betting man, that's where my money would go. I mean, Shock, you just can't count this team out. I don't really care if they have a bad week. They get some L's. Doesn't bother me. I just think I believe in this roster, to the end of the earth.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that we've said a lot of great things about the Los Angeles Valiant, about the Gladiators, but they're currently sitting at 17th and 12th place, respectively. Do you see them climbing up a bit higher than that going forward in the season?
Yeah, actually, I would have thought Valiant would have a better season. I think maybe getting a bit unlucky in the metas and stuff, but they've also had some tough opponents. So that strength of matchup maybe will start to favor them going longer into the season. But yeah, it's got to feel bad for Valiant, right? They've had so many close games against some of the best teams, and yet not closing them out. And that could be some of that experience on the other teams. The fact that Valiant has a lot of new players. Maybe not making the Game 5 adaptations as well as the more experienced veterans on other squads. But I do think both those teams, I for sure expect Gladiators to make playoffs. I think Valiant could easily turn the season around, but they're going to have to tighten things up. I think for me, for them, it's not about strategy so much. I feel like the coaching staff has that pretty well locked down on the Valiant. I think it's just execution-wise. They've been making some roster swaps, and the whole team is, a lot of rookies. So not that they can't execute, but they seem to be struggling with like the perfect consistency that's required in the Overwatch League. You can't have those slip-ups late in the series, especially. That are natural, if you're a newer player, less experienced, but you can't allow that to happen. Especially you look at some of the other rookies, Alarm and Funny Astro, you forget that they're rookies. They don't make slip ups like that. So, Valiant, they just got to clean it up. But I do think they've got the strength of roster for sure to make playoffs. But obviously now it's a tough test. They're going to have a strong second half of the season.
Well, I'm sure we'll see these standings sort of switch around quite a bit more. Looking at them, those like the Seoul Dynasty have only played 2 matches, whereas the Houston Outlaws have played 10. So still quite a bit to go, despite being almost at the halfway mark here for the season. Coming up next, though, we're actually going to talk about a few of the teams that have a few more games under their belt, what we expect from them going forward, what we've seen so far. But let us know what you guys think about some of these matches over on Twitter. We'd love for you to engage with us, get your opinions on them. You can find us over at CheckpointXP on Twitter and Facebook. You can find me at Robbie_Landis CP and Jake at Jake OW. We'll be right back.
The COVID-19 pandemic has affected us all, but for some, it's led to near unlivable conditions. Many families rely on the meals provided by schools to feed their children, but with schools across the country closing their doors, those families are left desperate for solutions. And that's why we're so proud to partner with No Kid Hungry and a handful of others for Shutdown Showdown. 100% of our proceeds will support the charity to ensure kids get the meals they need during school closures and all year long. But we wouldn't be able to do it alone. So far, gamers and brands have come together by competing and donating to support our response effort to combat COVID-19's effect on the world. And we want you to join the fight alongside us. So grab your teammates and drop into Shutdown Showdown for those in need of your support and join the fight so together we can win the fight.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching and listening, if you happen to be listening to the podcast. If you haven't, maybe you're constantly catching us over on YouTube at CheckpointXP. If you'd like us mobile or on the go, you can download the audio version of this show on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you find your podcasts. Make sure that you're checking out both this show and all the other content we do over at CheckpointXP.com. And if you're not following already, Jake_OW over on Twitch. Make sure those notifications are turned on. So something I'd like to do over the next few weeks is, for this middle segment here, take 2 teams each week, talk about how they've been looking so far this season, where they could end up, their strengths, weaknesses, ups and downs. So we're kind of looking at teams that have played 9 to 10 matches already, which is putting them just about a third of the way through the season here. So who I'd like to start out with here, no bias intended, but of course, the ones that I stand, the Houston Outlaws, had a very, very shaky start to the season, which they contributed a lot of to catching the flu, a lot of them being under the weather, and they've started to bounce back a little bit. They're up at 14th place right now, 4-6. So, Jake, your initial thoughts, used to be your old team. How are the Outlaws looking right now, and where do you sort of see them going forward?
Well, I think, the Outlaws, a lot of people were questioning, is this a valid excuse, everyone being sick and having a rough start to the season, a really rough start, in fact. But it feels like that's pretty legit now with how crazy the turnaround has been for this team. I mean, you got to give them a ton of credit. They've beaten a lot of strong teams, making reverse sweep, like some pretty impressive results, I think, overall from the squad. And I think, a long time earlier on in the season when they're 1-5 or something, it would have looked pretty crazy to think that this team's going to make playoffs. But now with how great the rebound has been, that seems very much within reach. I do think that the Outlaws still are going to be a bit dependent on like how the hero pools shake out. Like there could be some bad hero pools for them still. I don't know if they have the depth, or they haven't exactly shown the depth of playing every style of comp yet. But that's also because we haven't seen them so much recently. But to be fair, on the other side of that is that, since that initial rough start, it feels like they've just been looking straight up, like tons of wins in a row, lots of great games. So I think very much anything is possible for the Outlaws. This is a major inflection point for them. Or I guess they already had their inflection point. The question is now, will they be able to continue that strong upward trend? Or, facing some of the toughest teams in the league, will they fall off going into the end of the season? I'm pretty optimistic though, honestly. Obviously it was looking bad, but now the turnaround's been epic, and that the mental fortitude that it takes to do that, regardless of, gameplay issues. I think the mental fortitude it takes to make that turnaround from a really down start, especially on a franchise that struggled in the past, you got to be respecting that. So props to the players. I think the pickups for the Outlaws this season have been huge, and really excited to see where they go. Hope they make playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the pickups, obviously, Hydration, Blase, Repel, Meko, Jexa, and then an entirely new coaching staff as well. Do you think maybe one of the pains that they might be going to is still sort of learning how to adapt and play with one another? And, that would be something that, if that is an issue, that going forward, they're only going to get stronger. Yeah,
exactly, right? Like, I think they had, a lot of things issue in the start of the season, right? Whether it's, changing players, and on top of that with the flu and stuff. So to relieve all those issues at once, taking the weights off, time to see what they can really do. I think I can't wait to see this team match up against some of the top teams, and maybe they can make some upsets happen.
So I was actually able to speak to Harsha early on before the season started, and he said that, obviously one of their aspirations, obviously championship, sure, but he said at the very least, he wants to make sure that they make it into playoffs. So what do you think the chances of seeing the Houston Outlaws make it into the playoffs are?
Right now it looks pretty good, honestly. They just have to maintain the strong trajectory. Obviously, that rough start is going to be a weight around their ankles in terms of going forward. They're going to have to be really, really strong, not really, whereas a lot of these teams that have had strong starts, they've got room to slip up, to have some bad weeks, some hero pools they don't like, take some L's. The Outlaws don't really have that, I feel. I mean, obviously they can take a couple more losses. It's not like we're not that close to the end of the season yet to where we can start mathing it out. But it does feel like they need to have some really strong weeks, especially you want to be in that comfort zone, be positive in the win rate, which they're close to doing, just need to get a couple more strong weeks. But those strong weeks, aren't going to be easy. They have some tough games.
All right, speaking of those who are probably doing a lot better than anyone else, talked about them a little bit there in the first segment, but the Philadelphia Fusion, they're currently sitting 8-1 plus 15 map differential. I mean, it's probably pretty clear right now that, of course, we're going to see the Philadelphia Fusion in the playoffs here. What do you think some of the bigger challenges are that Philadelphia has going forward? We did just see them get taken to a Game 5 by Paris and Atlanta, both still strong teams. But if anything, what is it that Philadelphia has to overcome here for the rest of the season?
I don't think they really have to overcome much in terms of obstacles. It's pretty much steady as she goes. Obviously, there's no free wins in the Overwatch League. But at the same time, Philly do look like pretty clearly one of the best teams right now, and I don't think, especially in the region, I don't think there's too many people who can upset them. I would have thought Paris would be one of those teams that could upset them. I would have thought Atlanta would be one of those teams, and taking it to Game 5 and still winning shows that Philly still has that clutch power, which I think is especially meaningful coming into playoffs. You got to have the confidence in those playoff series. That the pressure is high, the tension is high. If your team has a weak mental, you could easily be broken by a bad map here or there in playoffs. But it shows that Philly doesn't have that issue. So I think the only thing they have to overcome is their own overconfidence, maybe getting too confident in this season just because they're so far ahead right now. But if they just keep their heads down, maintain what's been the biggest change for them this season, which is, being more organized and focused and not stooping down to the level of a weaker opponent, then this team could easily win the season. I mean, very, very realistic. So I don't think there's much in terms of obstacles, really. Just steady as she goes, Philly. You got great players, great roster. They've been doing a great job on the coaching staff as far as getting value out of different players' hero pools. I'm just excited to see what the future holds for the Philly.
What do you think the likelihood is of Funny Astro or Alarm? And if you had to pick one of them, who do you think's getting Rookie of the Year?
I mean, it's just the bane of main support is that, you're never going to get awards. It's pretty hard, but I do think Funny Astro is that good, but I would give it to Alarm just because, he makes the pop-off plays and frags out, which Funny Astro does too, but it's just, you're not doing it as often on main support, just the reality of it. But I do think they're both high-impact players, but I'm mostly giving Funny Astro tons of props because I know players who play with him and teams he's been on, and they all say the same thing, that he's like this huge presence on the team. So I know he offers that much, but it's one of those things where I'm main support. The people who really know how good you are your teammates. And nobody else can really appreciate it quite the same as the people you're leading in the match with your comms and whatnot. So.
All right, so Philadelphia Fusion, if we don't see them in the playoffs, I'm going to be very disappointed. And the Outlaws, if they can keep the plays up, they have a pretty good shot here. Up next, we're going to discuss the recent hero bans, how they might affect the meta, and changes to the hero ban system. Once again, stick with us.
Hey, this is Norris from CheckpointXP, here to bring you your next CSL flashback. This time, we go to CSGO, where we see University of Massachusetts Pat go absolutely nuts with the scope.
Such a clever play. They rotate back up, but they've got the barrel of Pat in the way. He gets one. He even gets a second. Oh my God, Pat! What are you? Oh my God, Pat! What the hell is this? Pat! I freaked out just a little bit there.
Jesse is thirsty. Ow! Whoop! Whoa! Ah! Whoa! Holy crap! Get out of there! Jesus! Damn! Welcome back in, everyone, to the Owl's Nest. Now, normally here in this third segment, we'd preview some of the upcoming matches of the week, but this weekend, the schedule been a little elongated, stretched out a little bit more, so there are Thursday and Friday matches going on, as well as the Eastern teams playing very, very early in the morning on Saturday and Sunday. So instead, we're gonna do something a little bit different here. First of all, there are some new hero ban rules that have came through that are gonna help align those playing on the competitive ladder more with what's going on in the Overwatch League. And essentially the same sort of rules where the tickets that are being put into the very highly technological bingo spinning ball there will now be affected not just by Overwatch League play, but also by the top competitive ladder. As a result of this, the hero ban for this week was taken from both of them, and poor Brigitte was the only support that was on the table to be banned out, since the other two were banned in both competitive play and in the OWL. So, you know, sorry, Brigitte. We also saw Reinhardt, McCree, and Widowmaker get pulled. So the first thing that I want to ask you, Jake, is how do you feel about the sort of new rules now to where both the competitive ladder and professional play affects the heroes that are banned?
I mean, I think it's really, really important that they be synchronized, just because imagine being a pro player and like the hero you need to practice for this week with the meta in Overwatch League is banned and ranked. And then you just like, okay, I guess I'll scrim only and like do not practice my hero in ranked. Or if you're not that confident on the hero, then you're like, well, I'm screwed, right? Like there's no way to practice it. So I do think it's a pretty terrible situation when the hero pools are different. It also makes it harder as a viewer. You're like watching the Overwatch League play Reaper, Torb or whatever, and then you go to ranked and it's like, wait, Reaper's banned? Like, or like, you know, just the game is different, even if it's not the specific hero. The fact that the hero pool is different changes the game, and you don't get to play what the people in Overwatch League are playing, and I think that kind of sucks. As a big fan of the viewer, or as a big fan of the Overwatch League and a fan of the game, I want it to be the same. I don't love that ranked is affecting the hero bans in the Overwatch League. It might lead to some issues, like something like Genji, which is like sees virtually zero play in the Overwatch League, might get banned just because people don't care in ranked and they just play for fun. The one thing I want to know is like what SR is like high level ranked, because they don't ever say that. I don't know, is it GM, is it Masters, like where is it, top 500, like where does it start, where do they care about the data? And I also think there's gonna be some problems with it, like Echo is gonna have a really high pick rate for like weeks, months.
Oh yes,
right. So the hero's always gonna have a, even if it wasn't good in the Overwatch League, like even if McCree just counters this hero too hard. I mean, I think Echo's quite strong, but what's yet to be seen is McCree just the hard counter and this hero just not good because she just dies to McCree really easily, which I think very easily could be the case. Her hitbox is quite large and McCree kills her quite fast. So I'm not like super confident that Echo will be this dominant meta hero, but she's 100%, like it does not matter. She will be like the highest pick rate DPS for a month in pubs because every new hero is that. So it's sort of the reality of like pub stats being pretty questionable in terms of their meaning.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good insight too. I'm on the same pages as you are. Obviously, what people play on the ladder and what we're watching in the OWL should always be synchronized, especially for those few weeks where the devs were like banning out 2 tank heroes or 2 main support heroes. I don't know how anyone managed to play through that. But I do also agree that just taking into consideration part of the comp, I never even really thought about that either. That Genji, like you said, doesn't see much play, but there are entire Genji mains on the competitive ladder. And it could definitely lead to at least a few stale weekends if, because of the competitive ladder, heroes that we don't see a lot in the OWL end up receiving the bans because of competitive on its own. I don't think a whole lot of people would complain if, we stuck to just banning heroes based on OWL usage, but it had a trickle down into the regular game there too. So taking a look at the heroes we do have banned again, Reinhardt, Brigitte, McCree, and Widowmaker. Poor hit scans out there once again. What do you think the gameplay is going to look like? What do you think some of the compositions are going to look? Are we going to look, probably go back to a whole lot of dive?
Well, in ranked with Echo, I think Echo is like incredibly powerful right now because, Ashe and Soldier are the only hit scans left and the only traditional hit scans left. So Ashe is pretty decent at killing Echo, so is Soldier. They're okay, but I think McCree would be like the true hero to be playing against Echo, especially because the copy on McCree is not all that effective, whereas copying Soldier and Ashe I think is quite effective. So McCree, just the matchup is really great against Ashe, but the fact that he's out of the pool means Ashe gets to have like Echo gets to have a huge boost to her utility. She's much more difficult to answer at this moment. Yeah, I think the lack of hit scan is interesting. We get to see Ashe and Soldier see play because, the hit scan in general is incredibly powerful, and Ashe and Soldier are generally the weakest to hit scan. Are generally they're not bad heroes, they're just worse than McCree and Widow. They don't deal with the same amount of burst damage. They have various limitations in the sniper and brawler class for hit scan, respectively. But I think without them, the game gets pretty crazy. Like a lot of like fast moving dive, heroes that would normally get picked off by McCree sitting in the back line or a Brig defending her supports or her DPS. Those without those stuns, without those control effects, it's a lot easier to get in the back and flank and be surrounding an enemy. But honestly, I think it'll be a double shield meta because I think without Ryan, you pretty much can't brawl. Like the rushing brawl strat just does not seem good at all. Maybe it'll be like Orisa Diva instead of Orisa Sigma. I think those are fine too. But honestly, I just don't see dive really being viable right now. It's just I just don't think dive is a good style. Certain maps, like you got your Ilios, sure you'll play dive there and whatnot. There's certainly going to be maps where dive is strong, but on the majority of the map pool, I think the shields with spammers is just so powerful right now.
Yeah, the last time that I hoped for dive, we ended up getting Soldier and Torbjorn, so who knows what it might end up being. But regardless, looking forward to a good week of Overwatch League, guys. But that's all the time that we have for today. Once again, we'd love to hear your thoughts on what you'd like to see go on this week. Connect with us on social media. That's CheckpointXP on Twitter and Facebook. You can also find Jake at JakeOW and on Twitch at Jake_OW, guys. Until next week, remember, stay on that payload.